Hi, and welcome to this Firehouse Quick Chat. My name is Peter Matthews. I'm the editor of Firehouse magazine, and I'd like to thank you for joining us. Today we have Don Griffis from L3Harris Corporation. He's the principal product manager for them. And we're going to talk about fire radios and what's going on. There's a lot of changes. The new NFPA standards are about to come out, and we're looking at dramatic changes to the technology that firefighters are going to be using to communicate on the fire ground and communicate with the 911 centers and the dispatchers. So Don, before we get into the quick chat here, tell me a little bit about your background. You're a veteran of the emergency services radios. And if you could also tell us a little bit about L3Harris.
Sure. Well, thank you. And thanks for having us here and having me here today. I appreciate it. My name is Don Griffis. I've been around public safety radio for about the last 26 years. And in that 26 years, it's all been mission critical land mobile radio, both for L3Harris and also for Motorola. So I've worked in both companies for quite some time. I've been in, my radio background goes a lot further back into time because I've been an amateur radio operator since I was 10 years old. So I've been around and actually I don't work a day in my life because I'm doing what I love, which is
That's great.
Working with first responders and communications. I'm based here in Lynchburg, Virginia, and this is part of the PS and PC division of L3Harris. We are located in our main headquarters are down in Melbourne, Florida, and my division is headquartered up in Rochester, New York.
Okay. All right. So can you tell us a little bit about L3 and what they do, and then again, just kind of bring it in for the viewers about the public safety aspects of what L3 does.
Sure. So L3Harris is we're a global, military defense contractor that we've got many different divisions. Part divisions are our space systems division, and that's where we launch satellites into orbit and have a lot of satellites in orbit right now. If you're using GPS of any kind, that's an L3Harris satellite that you're getting that GPS coordinates and weather satellite for that fact. And we also do a lot with, the F-16, the different aircraft that are out there for the radar systems that are on them and the antennas on the different aircraft. And my division, the RF, the communications division, our TACCOM division, is split up into our we call them the green radios. That's for our men and women in uniform that are using the tactical communication gear. Okay. And my division is PS and PC of public safety and professional communications, which is for police, firefighters, EMS, utilities, et cetera. And, those are both based out of Rochester. And like I said, the PS and PC is headquartered down here in Lynchburg, Virginia.
All right, great. Well, Don, thank you. And so let's kind of start the discussion today with the base of the standard or the standard of communications for the fire service. So NFPA 1802, that's the standard on two-way portable RF voice communication devices for use by emergency services personnel in the hazard zone. So we'll just call it fireground radios for sake of ease.
Fireground radio. Sure.
So your committee has been involved, or actually in the process of bringing out the latest version of the standard. We're at about that time where it's about ready to drop. So can you tell us about some of the changes with this NFPA 1802 standard and what the fire service needs to expect from what's about to come out?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, it's when you think about it, it's kind of incredible, right? That a firefighter today will go into a building and their turnout coat, that's an NFPA certified turnout coat. Their SCBA, their air tanks, their gloves, everything about what they're going in right now is NFPA certified. The one piece of life-saving gear that a firefighter goes into that building with that's not NFPA certified, yet, is the communication device, that radio that they carry either in their turnout coat pocket or on their bandolier. So it's, this is an exciting time, I think, for the fire industry, for the NFPA to set down a specification, the 1802. And the 1802 doesn't just affect the radio. It's both the radio and the fire speaker mic that the firefighters usually have on their turnout coat. Because let's face it, that's the primary mode of interaction with the radio. That the firefighter has is that FSM or fire speaker mic that's on their lapel. And both the radio that's in their pocket or on their bandolier and that microphone have to meet this new standard. And it's a pretty rugged standard. And it's not a one time. If you think about a lot of when we go right now in the communications division, anything we have to go through and get FCC certification. And then there's a mil spec certification that all radios go through today. It's a one-time thing. With NFPA 1802, yeah, you get it, and you get to have the special label that's on the radio and the fire speaker mic. But then the NFPA will also audit throughout the year the manufacturer to make sure they'll pull devices off the line and make sure, and they'll run the test again to make sure that randomly that the manufacturers are adhering to the standard. So it's got to be done in an accredited lab. There is one being set up today. I mean, as we speak right now, these, like you said, the certification and the actual standard is about to be released. It's imminent. We expect it anytime now. It's been reviewed and there's been different revisions of it. And the final revision is in there right now, ready to get launched out of the chute by all the different committee members. And L3Harris is one of the 36 committee members that are present for these NFPA.
All right, Don. So the traditional radio that our fathers or grandfathers were accustomed to using, this is not it. The new technology that's out there, it's really evolving as that lifeline that the firefighters have. I mean, between, like you mentioned before, SCBA, but the radio is the communications between the interior crews and the exterior crews, letting everybody know what's going on. And should you become entrapped or have some sort of issues that you need assistance, that's your lifeline. You're calling, you're picking up that radio, you're calling for help. So what do we need to know? What are the manufacturers doing to meet the new standard that's coming out with 1802?
You know, it's a great point. Something you just said there. This is a lifeline. You know, I've been to many different fire stations and firehouses, and the one thing I've heard is, you know, when I go into a fire, I bring 3 pieces of gear that are my life-saving. And one is my SCBA, one is my turnout coat, and the other is my radio. And this isn't, like you said, it's not going to be your dad's radio anymore. The NFPA calls out for operation, specifications to deal with the environment that is very unique for firefighters, right? Withstanding high heat. You know, the couple things that are around fires, you know, when a firefighter's in a burning building, you've got extreme heat. So the NFPA calls out one of the tests is to bake the radio at 500 degrees in an oven and leave it in there, you know, for 5 minutes, and then take it out and run a test on it. Run the perform RF test, make sure it can transmit, receive, and operate, right? That it's actually able to operate at that temperature. And you know, when I tell that to people, you think about it, that's what you would put your steak in the oven to sear it and get a nice sear onto it for 5 minutes. So you can imagine what's the radio's got to withstand that. And that's not even a tough one, right? That I think for the radio manufacturers, and what we found as the toughest one is the oven is actually turned down to 350 degrees. The radio's put in for 15 minutes, and it has to operate at that point. It's taken out of the oven, and then within 30 seconds is placed into 72-degree water and left there for 15 minutes. So that initial dunk within 30 seconds, going from 350 to 72 degrees, causes a little sizzle, if you can imagine. And and then when the radio is removed out of that bucket of water, all the audio, the analog testing, the transmit receive tests are performed on it to make sure that it's still fully functional. And if it is, it gets put back in the oven again at 350 degrees. And that test is repeated 6 times. So that's really a very tough test it's extreme. And if that wasn't enough, you know, the NFPA also does a flamethrower test where the radio is immersed in 1700-degree flame for 10 seconds. It has to be operational. And all these tests that I'm talking about are the radio there's no silicone shield around it. There's no turnout coat around it. There's no bandolier. It's just the radio and the fire speaker mic in the ovens all by themselves. The device itself has to meet this. And then, you know, outside of that, the NFPA has expanded the drop test. A typical mil spec drop test, the mil 810, is a 1 meter. It's a little over 3 feet drop. The NFPA 1802 calls for a 3 meter. That's almost 10 feet drop. And you know, you got to think about it. That's a firefighter's truck or the pumper panel are sitting up pretty high, and they can drive off and the radio's sitting up there or have it on their cab seat and inadvertently get knocked out onto solid asphalt. and it's got to repeat that 8 times. And then there's a surface abrasion where a grinding, if think of an abrasive wheel, is put onto the front of the display, the top display for a set period of time, and then it's removed, and it's still got to be legible because it's just got to be tough. And then things like cable pull out of the FSM. You know, you've got to pull the cable with up to 35 foot-pounds of force, and it's got to be able to withstand that. And, you know, have the case integrity. You have to be able to, the case on the different planes of, whether it's laying flat on its back or on its top or sides, has to sustain 440 pounds of pressure on each side. So there's a lot of different tests that are the radios are set up to, just to make it robust and really rugged for the firefighters who are, you know, they're the, I lovingly say it, they're our most abusive users of radios as a fire agency. And it's not because they're intentionally, it's just the line of work that they're in, quite frankly.
Well, it's mimicking. I mean, you know, unfortunately, we've had deaths in the last few years where firefighters have been put into these extreme heat conditions. And while the bunker gear and everything else that's been put out, the hoods, that helps to protect them. You know, this lifeline, we've seen some issues where there's been issues where there's been some melting and stuff like that. So it's good to see that that's kind of catching up with the technology that the SCBA has to meet, and you know, that of you know, the PPE that they have to wear as well. So that's great.
Right.
So now the big question is current radios that are in the field right now that, you know, is on Engine 1 in downtown Anytown, USA, and the mic that goes with it. Are those going to meet the standard?
Yeah, and the answer is probably not. I mean, I don't know of any radio out there that can meet this. We've put several different radios. We put our own radios in this test, our current shipping radios, and we know that they won't. And outside of that, there's a lot of other features. The fire speaker microphone. Here's something that's going to be really unique. The fire speaker microphone, the connector on it is a universal connector, so that if L3Harris has an NFPA rated microphone, and say a Motorola or Kenwood fire radio wants to use it, that connector is standard and will work in any radio. So part of the standard is interoperability between the radio and the fire speaker mics from different manufacturers. So that's kind of a new thing that's, to my knowledge, has never been done. So it's going to be very unique, and let's see how that goes. Something you had mentioned is all the safety features. The NFPA has added in a lot of software in addition to the hardware function and that robustness. A lot of software features, inadvertent powering off of the radio. Sometimes the oxygen line or something will hit the volume control and maybe inadvertently try and turn the radio off or make it select off.
Okay.
If that happens, the radio still won't power off. It's you have to have a 2-action power off when you're in this mode. Voice enunciations for everything as your battery, the temperature of the radio, things like that are part of the standard. Cable fault detect. Some firefighters, like you said, will be crawling around in the attic of a building, and a roofing nail could sever, burn into. Remember, roofing nails at the temperature of that fire now, and melt the fire speaker mic cable that connects it to the radio. And in some cases, the end user will not know. They'll still be hitting push to talk and trying to make communications, not knowing that line has been severed. Okay. The NFPA calls out for if there's any fault in that cabling between the radio and the fire speaker mic, the radio is going to revert back to the internal mic and speaker. And also, outside of that, start blasting very loudly that you've got a cable fault detect to let the user know that there's an issue. So there's a lot of safety features being built in software-wise into this specification for the radios as well.
So, I mean, that level of intelligence is really increasing the firefighter safety and awareness of what's going on around them, which is key. I mean, it is key because they're focused on everything else. You know, that radio always works, right? You never had a problem. You always go to it, boom, everything is fine. So this is great technology. Upgrades to really help the firefighter go to the next level. And really, I mean, just, be a second set of eyes for what's going on inside the building. So that's great. And so you mentioned the software. Can you tell us a little bit more about the software changes that they should expect too?
Sure. I mean, so a couple of things. The one thing is the NFPA has determined that the radio shall be very similar to a black box of an aircraft.
Okay.
So there's a data logging that's taking place, software data logging internally in the radio, that's saving the last 2,000 actions of the radio, whether it's a channel change or a talk group change, an emergency call. It measures at a certain interval, the battery level, the actual temperature of the radio. So and if someone user happens to activate the emergency button, all of those actions are recorded and stored in the radio, 2,000 of them, and it cycles through that. So that's a very big one. To allow for after action reports, you can go through there and see, well, here's the call that took place at this time here, or here's when the emergency button was activated. Here's a couple of calls that took place. Here is the battery level at that point. And the whole idea of that is also that information can be extracted to maybe in the future, the next time that someone goes in, how they interact with the radio. And again, I think you mentioned it. We want, as manufacturers, all of us, we don't expect firefighters to be radio operators or engineers that have to modify. Their primary mission is in there fighting a fire when they're inside of a building. They just need to have it work, push the talk and go and have that. And there's a lot of technology in modern radios outside of the NFPA, things that I can see in the future where we will actually improve the firefighter safety in addition to what the NFPA is put in as part of the standard.
Okay. Well, that's phenomenal. That's definitely not your father's radio, let alone your grandfather's radio.
It is not.
And if you think about it, a grandfather's radio was handheld, right? There wasn't even a speaker mic at that point. So you were out in that environment with your gloved hand trying to, find the push to talk button long before this technology came up that really, the manufacturers, you guys have done a great job to keep it where it's to contour to the gloved hand. So this is just taking it to a whole new level though. So this is interesting. And so, okay.
No, I was going to say, you're nailing something else. The NFPA, part of the spec is that it must, the radio and the fire speaker mic must be easily actioned by a gloved hand. With an NFPA, they give out the NFPA rated glove that you have to use to go out and make sure that the emergency activation button or the push to talk or any of the keys on the radio are usable with a gloved hand. So I'm glad you mentioned that. That's a part of the spec as well. That's
great. And even with the dexterity that the gloves have today, it's still, it's still very thick to work.
They're big.
So if you're a department that's got, a 10, 12-year-old radio, what's the next steps for those departments?
And I think that's probably the most, if when I talk to different chiefs and agencies that I go out to, I think one of the biggest things that gets excitement going outside of, hey, there's a spec out there that's really designed to get the men and women that are putting their lives on the line home safe every day, is the fact that your guys and gals are going to get new radios, right? Since you asked me earlier, is there any radio today that can meet it? And the answer is no. And even if it was able to meet it, so this is the question, it would still have to go through, it's not retroactive. So if you had a radio today that for some reason or was able to meet all of the NFPA specs, it's not retroactive, right? It's at the time, and it's both the hardware and software that have to get validated. So the short story is the fire agencies, you're all going to get new radios. And I know that most of the agencies out there are used to getting, some of the lucky ones get new radios just for them, but other ones are getting the hand-me-downs from the police. The police get new, nice, shiny radios, and the fire agencies get the old ones. With the NFPA 1802 spec, fire agencies are going to be getting new radios just for their hands. It's a radio that's been designed for them. That's very exciting.
That's great. Well, Don, I really appreciate you joining us today and kind of filling us in. It's a very good look at what's coming down the road. So thank you for sharing everything. The standard change, but just really an inside look at what's going to be the next radio for the fire service to be able to pick up and use on an emergency situation. It's going to change the world, and that's also going to require training, right? The firefighters are going to have to learn, how to use the new technology, and keep, the radio shop folks will be very busy making sure all the upgrades are in place. So very insightful. I really appreciate you joining us today. Anything else before we wrap up?
No, I really want to thank you for first of all, for allowing me to spend some time today and talk about it. I'm excited. I think you're right. The one thing, you're right, training will have to go out there, but ideally, the the NFPA and what the manufacturers, what we want is just so no matter how the firefighters place that microphone on their body or the radio on them, that it's just going to work. It's going to pick up their voice. It's going to work in those hot temperatures along with that exposure to water that they get and all the noise, right? The noise that comes out of there. So, I'm excited by it. I think that the standard that's coming out is going to do wonders and hopefully save lives and, move the fire communications into a new realm that they haven't seen before. So I really appreciate your taking the time out today and allowing me to talk about it.
Well, Don, thank you so much. And you can reach Don through L3Harris's website. That's just L3Harris.com, the letter L, number 3, Harris.com. Don, thank you so much. And when things get back to normal, we look forward to seeing you back at the events and seeing you in some firehouses to provide some insight. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And hope to see you soon too. Thanks, everyone.